Welcome back, Life Sciences. I hope you had a wee break. We're going to have to stop with the wee break when we look at a different section, but it's fun while it lasts. What are we looking at? We are looking at this concept of homeostasis. Things need to be balanced. And the last segment, we looked at this concept of how our kidneys are able to balance or regulate the pH in our body. And so doing so, right, make sure that things work well. And what was the pH? Was the hydrogen, right? So if our body became too acidic, in the kidneys, in the tubules, we could, right, secrete or excrete the hydrogen into the tubules, and we could excrete it out, therefore, all right, balancing the pH in our blood, all right, in our interstitial fluids in our body. Okay, the next segment that we're going to look at has got quite a lot of terminology, quite a few new words. I think, as you can have a look behind me, quite a lot of new words on the board. It might look a little bit frightening, but we're going to go through it. And once again, listen to how I use the words. And if you're not sure, always go over the notes or your textbook so that you're able to understand the terms. The first term is a really big term. I know it doesn't sound like it, but it's quite an important term when it comes to the kidneys. And that is the word osmoregulation. Right, very often when we look at osmo, if I do that, I think a lot of you will think about osmosis. And in that concept, you are going to be correct. Because what it is it regulates, osmoregulation is where we balance our water, right? And usually when I say solute, very often it is about the salt, right? Or it could be about the glucose content in our body, right? The glucose content. What is osmosis? I'm not quite sure if you can remember, but it's the movement of water from a high concentration high concentration to a low concentration. And remember, what did you have to do? You had to go through a cell membrane. So it wasn't diffusion, right? And it's very often how a lot of, right, organisms are able to move things around the body. Guys, it's very important. Our water balance in our body has to be regulated. Why? I'm sure you can all think about a time, especially this first one, when you have had too little water, when you are thirsty, right? And all you want to do is have something to drink. And what happens is you become dehydrated. And some of you might have a headache, right? When we become dehydrated, we might have a headache, we might be dizzy, we might feel like we want to be sick, we want to vomit. Right? So when we are dehydrated, our body, right, it tells us that things are not right. And believe it or not, guys, we can actually have too much water. Sometimes the symptoms can be very similar to that. And if we have a look at it, imagine we have an animal cell, and if we have water move in, right, what happens is that cell membrane is going to burst, because unlike plant cells, we don't have a cell wall, right, that's going to be able to contain that water. So when we look at our seesaw over there, our balance, it is really important that we don't have too little water and we don't have too much. We've got to get the balance right. Now, when we look at this concentration, there's a word here, this balance, is that when we have solute, when we have things dissolved in our water, in the water, right? And what do I mean by water? Two things. Blood is made up of water, and remember our interstitial fluid, or our fluid in between our cells, that is water, which means that can have an influence. The greater the concentration of solute, let's imagine I've got two beakers over here, and I put water in each of them, and in this beaker I put 1 teaspoon of salt. And imagine in this beaker, I put 10 teaspoons of salt. So here I'm going to have a little bit of salt, a little bit of solute, and here I'm going to have a lot of solute. And guys, that has a huge impact, right, on how water is going to move. Let me explain to you what I mean. Okay, so say for example, here is your blood vessel over here. And you guys eat a lot of salt, right? A lot of salt. Check your food labels. Lots and lots of foods have salt, right? So here we've got, in your blood, we've got a lot of salt. Here is water surrounding the blood. Where does water move? Water moves from a high concentration to a low concentration. So water moves out of the interstitial fluid. So what happens to these cells over here? They are dehydrated, right? They lack water, so that is a problem. But when I put the water into my blood, what is happening? The water fills my blood vessels. And we all say, cool, water is filling our blood vessels. When water goes into our blood vessels, guys, that's called blood pressure, okay? Filling it. So when we have a lot of salt in our diet, so what happens? The water from our cells, interstitial, moves into my blood vessels are filled with fluid, and now they're under high blood pressure. And what does high blood pressure do? Right? I can have a stroke, I can have a heart attack. It could actually kill me. That is what osmolarity is. If I change what's dissolved in my blood or my cells, I change how water moves around. Okay, so if we have a look at like this, so what happens is, okay, so imagine now you don't have the water that you need. Remember, this is the nephron. These guys, this is called the loop of Henle. The loop of Henle is going to have a role right in the water. So say, for example, I don't really have that as much water, or let me go, nephron, as I needed that day. Look what the loop of Henle does. It pumps out sodium, all right? So it pumps out salt. I'm going to write here, salt. Now imagine you guys eat salt and vinegar chips, or lacquer slop chips with vinegar. What happens? What do you feel? Thirsty. So what always follows salt? High concentration, low concentration. What follows? Water. Okay? And where does this water go? This water goes into your blood. There's blood vessels around here. All right? You didn't have enough water for that day, and your body says, hey, dude, all right, you didn't have enough water, but don't worry, the kidneys have got it under control. So what happens? You've got less water in your urine because you drank less. Okay, but sometimes things just go out of control. I want you to picture it. It's a really hot day. You haven't had anything to drink. You're sweating, right? Your body needs to have a system that can bring about the change. And this is where a hormone comes in. It's called ADH, or Anti-Diuretic Hormone. And guys, what it is here, you have a little pituitary gland, right? It's an endocrine gland. That's an endocrine, right? It's a hormone. And what triggers it is part of your brain, okay? So you're really hot, you're really sweating, and have a look at this picture over here. Look at this guy, okay? He's hot, he's sweating, and he's losing all this water. Check the sweat just running off. So when the blood goes past his brain, right over here, there's got what we call osmoreceptors. It's in the brain. And it says to this guy, all right, listen here, dude, two things. Number one, the brain, the hypothalamus, the thirst center, says to this guy, drink water. You need water. I'm making you thirsty. Drink. It also sends this hormone, all right, over here, ADH, and this hormone goes to the collecting tubules. Now, guys, these collecting tubules are solid. They do not open, right? No water must go out of there. But this ADH, right, it controls these, and it says to these guys, all right, open up. I need water. There's a problem here. All right, I need water. And what has happened here? There's salt. What is your loop of Henle doing? It's actually actively pumping salt out. So where's their water? High concentration of water in my tubules, a low concentration in the medulla of my kidney. Where does water move? Water will move from a high concentration to a low concentration out of my urine. So I'm going to have less water in my urine. Okay, so guys, what this happens, this is a homeostatic control, really important. The hypothalamus is going to tell me, hey, I need to drink water, and I'm going to have this hormone, ADH, that's going to make these collecting tubules open, and I take water out. And obviously, then I have a far more higher concentration of urine. What are we looking at? We're looking at this concept of homeostasis. It's really, really important that certain, right, elements in our body need to be kept constant. So our body needs to have this balance. We need certain things. If something goes up, we need to bring it down again. And maybe if it lowers, we need to bring it back up. We need to bring it into balance. And that's the concept that we have been looking at. All right, there are a few words, as I said to you each time on the board, that we have to look at. New words, new terms, new vocabulary. Please make sure that you go through them and that you understand what the terms mean. All right, we're looking at this concept of homeostasis. And in the last segment, we looked at how our kidneys regulate the pH. And we looked at how our body, in doing its normal things, releases a lot of hydrogen, and that has an effect on how acidic our body can become. And because enzymes are very specific to enzyme, to pH, we've got to make sure that our balance is right. And our kidneys doing that, right, if we get too much hydrogen by releasing them. We also looked at the concept of, right, osmoregulation. How do we control water? And that was very often by a hormone called ADH and a part of our brain called our hypothalamus that together, all right, brought about us feeling thirsty, wanting to drink water, getting water back into our body, and also the kidneys. If we lack water, we can't excrete the water. The urine, we're wasting. So how does the kidneys, all right, absorb a lot of that water to stop us from dehydrating? Today, we're going to look at how our kidneys are going to control salt, right? Very important, all right, part of how that is going to occur. Now, if we have a look at the diagram over here, very often when we gave you a diagram of the kidneys, we would just draw the kidney looking like that. But that's actually not what the kidneys are totally all about. I want you to have a look at this structure. Right on the top of each of the kidneys is an endocrine gland. And what an endocrine gland is a gland that is going to secrete endocrine, right? It's going to secrete hormones. Now, hormones in the body are tied up with, right, how our body controls things and keeps us in the balance. Now, if we have a look inside these, all right, glands, we're going to see it's made up of, all right, two parts. And when we look at it, you're going to see later when you look at the endocrine system that there are two hormones that are released. But we are paying very much tribute to only one of those organs. I'm sure you can guess what the other one will be. These are called the adrenal glands. Okay, guys, let me write it over here for you. I think I can find space. Adrenal gland, and I'm sure you're right. Yes, it secretes adrenaline, right? Our fight or flight one. But we're very much interested in this second hormone, right? It's called aldosterone, and it balances our salt. Look how close it is to the kidney, right? Very close to the kidney. Now, when it comes to salt, the kidney, I'm afraid, when it balances the salt, it unfortunately doesn't balance when we eat too much salt. Right, so unfortunately, as I explained in the segment before here, having too much salt, the kidney actually doesn't get rid of that salt. And that's why it's really bad for us. Remember in the last segment, I think you might have remembered when I said when we have a lot of salt in our diet, our kidney is actually not going to get rid of the salt. It's actually not so much of a too much. It's going to help us when we have too little. So if we have a lot of salt in our diets, what happens? Right, water moves from a high concentration to a low concentration, moves into the blood vessels fill out, and what do we have? High blood pressure, because the water's made this huge big pressure in our bodies, and that obviously makes us more at risk to strokes, to heart failure, to heart attack, to a thrombosis. And it's unfortunate though, but our kidneys don't get rid of the extra salt. Our body keeps it. However, what our kidney is going to do is when we have too little salt, right, then it's going to make a different plan. So if we have a look, remember we've got how the nephron works. We looked at this glomerular filtration. We looked at tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. And when we look at salt, when we have too little salt, what is going to happen is our body needs to reabsorb. So if we have a look at tubular reabsorption, salt is obviously one of the things that we are going to reabsorb. So guys, what happens is that the hormone aldosterone, right, hormone aldosterone, when we have too little salt, the hormone is going to be secreted. Now let's have a look what happens when we have too little salt. So imagine it's here in my blood, right? And now I said to you, this is, like I'm contradicting myself. Too much salt is bad for me, but also too little salt can also be bad for me. So this is why it's important that I have this balance, right? So what will happen here? If I have too little salt, all right, in my body, where does the water move? Aha, the water moves out of the blood. So what happens to the blood levels, right? They drop, okay? So they drop in osmolarity. So my blood levels drop. That's not good. Also what happens is my blood volume is low, because what is happening? Water is moving out of the blood, and I don't want it to move out the blood. So what happens? It creates a really low blood pressure. So what aldosterone is going to do is, aldosterone, right, causes the salt. So where's the salt going to happen? Here in my sodium pump, all right, and here during my tubular reabsorption. What happens? Sodium is actively pumped out, aldosterone. So instead of it just happening normally, aldosterone says to the tubules, pump out the sodium, right? So actively, and remember, what is surrounding all of that is the blood. So because our blood levels are low, the sodium doesn't actually go into the kidney, but it goes into the blood of the kidney. And what happens? What increases? Right, increases. My salt concentration increases, which means my blood pressure increases, as does, right, the volume in my blood. It sounds to me a little bit weird that high blood pressure is going to cause me to come ill, but my body doesn't do anything about it. But when it comes to low salt concentration, my body is going to do this homeostatic process. It's one of those questions, we're not quite sure why. Why would it, all right, do something and then not the other thing? But that's not for us to question. Right, that is all for now. We're going to take a wee break and we'll be right back.